Cowboy found a frozen kid who is frozen inside out. Can he warm him up to save him? The morning came without light. Elias Boone opened his eyes in the dark. He always did, hours before the sun bothered to show its face. Outside his window, the wind howled like a wounded animal. The storm had rolled in 3 days ago, and it showed no sign of tiring. He sat up slow. His bones ached the way they always did now. 44 years old, and some mornings he felt twice that. He reached for the wool shirt hanging on the bedpost and pulled it over his head. The room was cold. The fire had died sometime in the night, and he had not bothered to wake and feed it. The house was quiet. Too quiet. It had been that way for years. He struck a match and lit the lamp. Its glow filled the small room, throwing shadows across the empty bed beside him. Clara sighed. He never slept there. Even now, after all this time, he stayed to his own half, as if she might come back and need the space. On the dresser sat a small tin frame. Inside was a picture of her, faded, but still holding her smile. Elias looked at it the way he did every morning. Before you continue listening, please let me know where in the world are you watching from today. Now back to the story. Cold one today, he said softly, the way a man talks to someone who is not there. You'd have made me stay in bed. She would have. Clara always found a way to keep him warm, even on the meanest of days. She used to say the world was too hard a place to face without a little kindness first. She gave hers freely, to strangers, to beggars, to anyone who wandered up their long dirt road with hunger in their belly. Elias pulled on his heavy coat and stepped out into the storm. The wind hit him like a fist. Snow came sideways, sharp as needles against his face. He tugged his hat low and pushed toward the barn, boots sinking deep with every step. The cattle waited inside, huddled together for warmth, their breath rising in white clouds. He forked hay into the troughs and broke the ice off the water. His hands went numb, but he kept working. Work was the only thing that made the days pass. The horses stamped and snorted as he moved among them. He rested a hand on the neck of his old bay mare and let the warmth of her settle into his palm. "Just you and me, girl," he murmured. That was the truth of his life now. Just him and the animals. He had not always wanted it this way. There was a time when the ranch was full of voices and plans and laughter. Then came the winter that took Clara. And before that, the other winter. The one he did not let himself think about often, because it hurt worse than losing her. The night he came too late. He could still see it if he closed his eyes. The stranded traveler, half buried in the snow, already gone by the time Elias reached him. He had ridden as hard as any man could. It had not been enough. He had knelt in the snow and screamed at the empty sky. A man who saves cattle but loses people. That was what he had become. He had told himself so many times that he almost believed it now. Some folks were meant to help. Some were meant to fail. Elias had decided long ago which one he was. He finished his chores as the gray day dragged on. He ate little. He spoke to no one, for there was no one to speak to. The storm only grew angrier as the hours passed, the sky darkening toward an early sunset. He was walking back from the barn when he saw them. Tracks. They cut across the snow near the main trail, then broke away, heading toward the frozen hills behind his ranch. They were small, too small for a grown man. They wandered, uneven, like whoever made them could barely stand. Elias stopped cold. Nobody had reason to be out here. Not in this. Not headed toward those empty, deadly hills. His heart began to pound. Every part of good sense told him to turn around, to go inside where it was warm and safe. Instead, he pulled his coat tight, lowered his head against the wind, and followed the tracks into the blizzard. The tracks led him deeper than he wanted to go. Elias followed them past the fence line, past the last of the fallen trees, out to where the land turned wild and cruel. The snow came harder now, It filled the little footprints almost as fast as he found them. If he had come an hour later, they would have been gone. Erased. As if no child had ever passed this way at all. The thought made his stomach turn. He pressed on. His legs burned from lifting his boots out of the deep drifts. His lungs stung with every breath of frozen air. But he did not stop. Something inside him would not let him stop. "Hold on," he said under his breath. He did not know who he was talking to. "Hold on, hold on." The tracks grew closer together, then began to stumble. He could read them like a story now, and it was a terrible one. Whoever made them had been falling, getting up, falling again, crawling near the end. Then the tracks stopped. Elias raised his lamp higher, squinting through the swirling white. At first he saw nothing but a long, smooth mound of snow at the base of a low hill. He almost turned away, almost told himself it was only a drift, only the wind playing tricks. Then he saw it, a hand, small, pale, fingers curled toward the gray sky, sticking up out of the snow like the last bloom of a dead garden. Elias froze where he stood. The wind screamed past his ears, but he could not move. He could not breathe. He was no longer standing in this storm. He was standing in that other one, years ago, kneeling beside a man who had already gone cold. He could feel that same helplessness rising up his throat like ice water. Too late. He was always too late. "I couldn't save him then," he whispered. The words came out broken. "Maybe I was never meant to save anyone." His feet wanted to carry him home. Back to the fire. Back to the safe, quiet grief he knew how to live in. What good would it do to dig up another body? To hold another lost soul in his arms and scream at the sky again? He turned halfway around, and then the fingers moved. It was barely anything. A twitch. A tiny curl, as if the hand were reaching for something it could no longer see. But Elias saw it. His heart slammed against his ribs. "No," he breathed. "No, no, no." He dropped the lamp and threw himself down into the snow. His bare hands tore at the cold with a strength he did not know he still had. He dug like a man possessed, flinging snow behind him, ignoring the burning ache spreading through his fingers. "I'm here," he said, over and over. "I'm here. Stay with me. Stay with me now." The snow gave way. First an arm, then a shoulder, then a small, thin face, blue in the lamplight. A boy. He could not have been more than 8 years old. His eyes were shut. Frost clung to his lashes and his lips. His clothes were stiff as boards, frozen solid to his little body. Elias pulled him free and gathered him into his arms. And that was when the fear truly took hold. The boy was cold, but it was worse than cold. It was a cold that came from inside him. Elias could feel it through the child's clothes, through his own thick coat, a chill that seemed to pour out of the boy's very bones. His breath, when it came, made tiny crystals in the air. His muscles were locked hard beneath the skin, as if winter itself had crawled inside him and made a home. Elias had seen frostbite. He had seen men freeze to death. He had never seen anything like this. "Lord help me," he whispered. But there was no time for wondering. The boy was alive. Barely, impossibly, but alive. Elias ripped off his own heavy coat and wrapped it around the child, tucking it tight, pulling the boy against his chest. The wind bit through his shirt at once, but he did not care. He whistled sharp for his mare. She came stamping through the snow, ears flat against the storm. Elias climbed up with the boy held close and turned her hard toward home. "Ha!" he shouted. "Go, girl! Go!" The mare surged forward into the dark, and Elias Boone bent low over the frozen child, his jaw set, his eyes fierce, and made himself a promise with every pounding beat of the hooves beneath him. Not this time, not again, not another one. The ranch house rose up out of the storm like a promise kept. Elias half fell from the saddle, The boy still clutched against his chest. He kicked the door open with his boot and stumbled inside, out of the wind, out of the killing cold. The sudden quiet rang in his ears. His arms shook, but not from the weight. The child weighed almost nothing at all. That was the terrible part. "All right," he breathed. "All right now. We're home. We're home." He laid the boy down on the rug before the big stone hearth and went straight to work. Years of living alone had made his hands quick with a fire. He struck the match and set the kindling blazing, then piled on log after log until the flames roared up the chimney. But one fire was not enough. Not for this. He moved through the dark house like a man chasing something, lighting the little fireplace in the bedroom, the old stove in the kitchen, every source of heat the ranch had to give. Soon, the whole house glowed orange and gold, warm as a summer noon. Still the boy did not warm. Elias knelt beside him and pressed a hand to the small chest. The heartbeat was there, faint, far away, like a knock on a door from 3 rooms off. "Come on," Elias whispered. "Come on, son." He remembered the old ways then, the things his own father had taught him, and his father before that. Ways to fight the cold when there was no doctor for 50 miles, and death was already sitting in the corner waiting. He stripped the frozen clothes from the boy, gentle as he could, and wrapped him in the warmest wool blankets he owned. He heated stones at the edge of the fire, wrapped them in cloth, and tucked them close to the boy's sides, his feet, the small of his back. He warmed a blanket and traded it for a cooler one, then warmed that one too, over and over, never letting the heat fade. Then he did the thing his mother always swore by. He lay down beside the child and pulled him close, giving the boy his own body's warmth, wrapping him up the way a man might hold his own son through a fever. "You just hold on," Elias murmured against the boy's hair. "You hear me? You're not alone. Not anymore." He melted snow in a pot and let it cool to just warm, then spooned tiny drops between the boy's blue lips. Most of it ran down the child's chin, but some went down. A little. That was enough to keep hoping. Hours passed that way. Elias lost track of them. The fire crackled and spat. The wind howled and threw itself against the shutters like something trying to get in. And through it all, Elias talked. He did not know why. He just knew the boy should not be alone in the dark with only the storm for company. "My name's Elias," he said. "Elias Boone. This here's my ranch. Best little piece of land in the whole valley, though it don't look like much tonight." He swallowed hard. "You just stay with me, and I'll show you come spring. I promise you that." When the fires burned low, he built them up again. When his eyes grew heavy, he dug his fingernails into his palm and stayed awake. He would not sleep. He would not leave the boy for even a minute. Somewhere in the deep black hours he had scrawled a note and sent his ranch hands boy riding hard for town, despite the weather, despite the danger. "Send Doc Reed, a child, dying. For God's sake, hurry." The doctor came just before dawn. Elias heard the horse first, then the hard knock. He opened the door to find Thomas Reed white with cold, snow crusted in his beard, his black bag frozen half shut. "Where is he?" Reed said, already pushing inside. Elias led him to the fire. The doctor knelt, laid his cold hands on the boy, felt for the pulse, pulled back the blankets, and looked, and looked. His face changed as he worked, from a healer's calm to something Elias did not like at all. "Elias," Reed said slowly. He pressed his fingers to the boy's arm and frowned deep. "This cold. It isn't on him. It's coming out of him, from the inside." He shook his head. "In 30 years of doctoring, I have never seen anything like this. Not once." "But you can help him," Elias said. It was not a question. Reed did not answer right away. He rubbed his tired eyes. "I don't know that anyone can," he said quietly. A man ought to be honest. I'm not sure this boy can be saved. Something hardened in Elias then. He crouched back down beside the child and took the small, cold hand in his own. Then you patch him up best you can, he said, his voice low and steady. And I'll do the rest. Because I am not letting go of this one. Not tonight. Not ever. And he stayed there, kneeling in the firelight, holding the boy's hand through the last dark hours before the sun. The sun came up gray and weak, but it came up all the same. Elias watched it through the frosted glass, a thin line of pale gold crawling over the snow. The storm had spent itself in the night. The wind that had screamed for hours now only sighed against the shutters, tired, beaten. The valley outside lay buried and still, white as a fresh grave. He had not moved from the boy's side. His knees ached. His back had gone stiff as an old fence post. But he did not care about any of that. He cared about the small chest rising and falling under the blankets. Slow, too slow, but rising, falling, still fighting. Doc Reed sat in the chair by the window, turning his coffee cup around and around in his hands without drinking from it. He had not slept either. The lines in his face looked deeper this morning, cut by tiredness, and by something worse. Worry that had no cure in his black bag. I have done everything I know, Reed said at last. His voice was quiet in the still room. Everything the books say, everything my own hands have learned. He set the cup down. By all rights, Elias, that boy ought to be warming by now. We've had fires burning all night, hot stones, blankets, your own body heat. He shook his head slow. A body takes to warmth. That's the nature of it. Cold comes in from the outside, and warmth drives it back out. But not with him, Elias said. No. Reed rose and came to kneel beside the boy again. He laid his fingers against the child's cheek, then along his throat, feeling. His frown deepened. Feel here. Elias reached out and touched the boy's face. The skin was warm now, warm from the fire and the blankets, and all the long hours of care. But underneath, deep beneath the warmth, was the cold. He could feel it, like a stone dropped in a river, warm on top and freezing at the bottom. It's inside him, Elias murmured. It's coming from inside him. Reed sat back on his heels. The warmth we give doesn't reach it, can't reach it. It's like trying to thaw a well by warming the bucket. He rubbed his face with both hands. I've never read of such a thing, never heard of it, never seen it. And I do not mind telling you that scares me more than anything has in a long, long while. The two men were quiet a moment. The fire popped. Somewhere in the barn, a horse stamped and blew. There has to be a reason, Elias said. Cold don't come from inside a person. Not like this. Something did this to him. Or something is keeping it in him. Reed pushed himself to his feet with a groan. I'll ride back to town. Look through what books I have. Ask the old folks if they ever heard tell of anything like it. He gripped Elias's shoulder. You keep him warm. Keep him fed, drop by drop, same as you've been doing. It may not be curing him, but by God, it's the only thing keeping him with us. Elias nodded. He walked the doctor to the door and watched him ride off into the white morning, growing smaller and smaller, until the snow swallowed him up. Then he came back inside. The boy's clothes lay in a frozen heap where Elias had stripped them off in the night. He'd meant to dry them by the fire. He gathered them up now, the little shirt, the trousers, the ruined boots, and the coat, a boy's coat, too thin for such weather, patched at both elbows with careful stitches. Something was in the pocket, something hard. Elias reached in and drew it out. A small wooden horse, hand-carved, worn smooth by little hands holding it. Someone had made this with love. He turned it over, and his throat went tight. His fingers found more. A folded scrap of paper, tucked deep in the lining where a searching hand might miss it. He opened it careful, for it was near frozen through. The words were written in a woman's hand. Rushed, desperate. Please don't let them take my son. Elias stared at it. His hands began to shake. This boy had not wandered into the snow. Someone had hidden him there. Elias sat down hard in the chair by the fire. He read the words again and again, as if reading them enough times might change them into something easier to bear. Please don't let them take my son. He was still sitting there, the scrap of paper trembling in his fingers, when he heard hoofbeats in the yard. He rose, his hand going to the rifle by the door, out of old habit. But it was only Doc Reed, come back not an hour after he'd left. Turned around halfway to town, Reed said, stamping the snow from his boots on the threshold. Couldn't shake the feeling I'd missed something. A man doesn't just freeze from the inside for no reason. He caught sight of Elias's face. What is it? What have you found? Elias held out the paper. Reed took it, read it. His face went still. Lord above, he breathed. There's more. Elias lifted the little wooden horse from the table. This was in his coat, and this. He pulled out the small leather pouch he'd found tucked against the boy's chest, cord still knotted tight. His fingers worked the knot loose. Inside was a fine, gray dust. It caught the firelight strange, glinting with tiny flecks of silver and pale blue, like frost that would not melt. Reed leaned close. He wet a fingertip and touched it, held it to his nose, then to his tongue. His brow furrowed deep. I know this, he said slowly. Or I know something near to it. Minerals. Ground. Fine as flour. He looked up sharp. Where would a boy come by a thing like this? But Elias was not listening. He was staring at the dust, and something cold walked up his spine that had nothing to do with the storm. I know where, he said. He crossed to the window and looked out toward the low rise behind the barn, where the land dipped and folded into a hollow the old folks never spoke of. Where, in his grandfather's time, there'd been talk of a spring that ran warm even in the dead of winter. A spring folks called cursed, or blessed, depending on who was doing the telling. Elias had capped it years ago, fenced it off, never gave it another thought. There's stones down in the South Hollow, he said. Gray stones, streaked with blue and silver. Same as this. I've walked past them 1,000 times. He turned back. This dust came from my own land, Reed, or from land just like it. The doctor's coffee had gone cold long ago. He set the pouch down, careful, the way a man handles something he doesn't understand. Then, whoever hid this boy knew about your spring, he said. Knew and wanted him found here, on your ground. He shook his head. Elias, this was no accident. This was a plan, a desperate one. Elias picked up the paper again. The signature at the bottom was small, near lost in the crease of the fold. He hadn't seen it before. He held it to the light. Margaret Turner. Turner, Reed said softly, reading over his shoulder. His breath caught. Margaret Turner. Elias, that name. She's the widow whose place burned out past the ridge come autumn. Folks said she up and left in the night, took her boy and vanished. His voice dropped. Nobody's seen hide nor hair of her since first snow. Then she didn't leave. Elias looked toward the bed, toward the small shape beneath the blankets. She was made to disappear, and she hid her son before they could take him too. Caleb, Reed murmured. The boy's name was Caleb. I remember now. Margaret Turner's boy, Caleb. At the sound of his name, something stirred in the bed. Both men went still. The boy's lashes fluttered. His lips parted, cracked and pale. His eyes opened, just a sliver, glassy and far away, as though he were looking up from the bottom of some deep, frozen place. They found Elias standing there in the firelight, tall and worn, dust still on his hands. The boy's mouth moved. Barely a sound came out. Elias dropped to his knees beside him, bent his ear low. Mama said, the boy whispered. Mama said the cowboy would come. Elias's heart stopped. She had known. Margaret Turner had known he would find her son. Elias stayed by the boy's side until the whispered words faded, and Caleb slipped back down into that deep, frozen sleep. Only then did he rise, his knees stiff, his heart pounding like a hammer on cold iron. "I've got to know more," he said. "About her. About what she crossed." Reed nodded slow. "Then you'll want to ride to town come morning. Careful, mind. Some things in Willow Creek folks won't say out loud." The storm eased before dawn, though the cold hung on like a grudge. Elias left Caleb wrapped warm with Reed watching over him, and rode the frozen miles into town, with the little pouch of gray dust tucked deep in his coat. Willow Creek was quiet under the snow. Smoke curled from chimneys. But there was a hush over the place that had nothing to do with the weather. Elias felt it the moment he tied his horse outside the general store. Folks glanced his way, then glanced quick away. Inside, old Hattie Pruitt stood behind the counter, sorting dried beans into jars. She'd known Elias since he was a boy in short pants. Her face softened when she saw him, then tightened again when he spoke the name. "Margaret Turner," she said, and her hands went still over the beans. She lowered her voice, though there was no one else in the store. "Now why would you go asking about her?" "I've got my reasons," Elias said. "Good ones. What happened to her, Hattie?" The old woman looked toward the frosted window. She was quiet a long moment. Then the words came out low and careful, like she was setting down something heavy. "She was a brave one, that Margaret. Braver than the men in this town, and that's the shame of it." Hattie wiped her hands on her apron. Her husband passed 2 winters back, left her that little place out past the ridge. She worked it herself, her and the boy. Then folks started losing their land. Papers they never signed. Debts they never owed. Fine print no plain farmer could read. She shook her head. Margaret, she could read it. She read all of it. And she started asking questions nobody wanted asked. "About who?" Hattie's eyes flicked to the window again. When she spoke, it was barely a breath. Silas Crow. The name settled over the store like a cold draft. Elias had heard it plenty. Everyone had. Crow owned half the valley, and the men who ran it, and the judge who signed for it. What Crow wanted, Crow took, and folks learned quick not to stand in his way. She had proof, Hattie went on. Or so they say. Papers, names, things that could have put Crow in front of a court that wasn't in his pocket, if such a court could be found. She pressed her lips together. Then her house burned, and she was gone. Folks said she ran, but I never believed it. A woman that stubborn doesn't run. Her old eyes met his, sharp and sad. She was made to disappear, Elias, and her boy with her. Elias felt the truth of it land square in his chest. He thought of the note, "Please don't let them take my son." He thought of the boy freezing from the inside, hidden in the snow on ground that held a secret older than Crow's greed. "Thank you, Hattie," he said quiet. "You be careful, Elias Boone." She reached across the counter and gripped his wrist with a strength that surprised him. "Whatever you've got mixed up in, you leave it be if you can. That man doesn't lose." He rode home with her words heavy on him, and the sky the color of iron. The ranch came into view over the rise, smoke rising steady from the chimney. For one moment his heart eased. The boy was safe. The boy was warm. Then he saw the horses, 4 of them, standing in his yard, their breath steaming in the cold. 4 men sat saddled and waiting, rifles laid easy across their laps. And out front of them, on a tall black horse, sat a man in a fine wool coat, a badge that meant nothing pinned crooked on his chest. Elias slowed his horse. His hand drifted toward his own rifle. The man in the wool coat lifted a gloved hand, almost friendly. "Elias Boone," he called. "We hear you've tooken a stray. A runaway boy. Mr. Crow wants him back." His smile did not reach his eyes. "Hand him over quiet, and there won't be no trouble. Get in the way, and there surely will." Elias sat still in his saddle. His breath clouded the air between him and the men. 4 rifles, 1 fine coat, and behind him, over the rise, a boy sleeping by his fire. "There's no runaway here," Elias said. His voice came out steady, though his heart was beating hard. "Just my ranch, my cattle, my business." The man in the wool coat chuckled low. He nudged his black horse a step closer, boots creaking in the cold. "Now, Mr. Boone, don't go making this harder than it needs to be. We got word. A cowboy pulling a boy out of the snow. Small thing. Dark hair, sick, most like." He tipped his head. "That ring any bells?" "Word travels fast," Elias said. "Faster than a doctor rides. You had eyes on my land." The man only smiled wider, and that told Elias all he needed to know. "The boy belongs to Mr. Crow now," the man said. "His mama owed a debt, big one. When folks can't pay, Mr. Crow collects what he can. The boy's collateral, that's the law." "Whose law?" Elias asked. "The Judge Crowbot?" One of the other riders shifted, his rifle rising just an inch. But the man in the coat lifted a gloved hand, and the rider went still. "You got a mouth on you, old man," he said. His voice lost its friendly edge. "I'll say it plain, then. Give us the boy, and you go on living quiet out here, like you always done. Keep him, and Mr. Crow takes an interest in you. And once he's interested, well..." He shrugged. "Houses burn. People wander off in storms and don't come back. It happens all the time out here." Elias's jaw tightened. He thought of Margaret's house, burned to black bones in the snow. He thought of the note pressed against a small frozen chest. "Margaret Turner," Elias said. "Is she dead?" Something flickered across the man's face. Surprise, maybe, that Elias knew the name. Then it smoothed over. "That's a funny question," the man said slow. "Seeing as you shouldn't know it. Answer it." The man studied him a long moment. Then he leaned forward on his saddle horn, and when he spoke, his voice dropped low, almost gentle, the way a man speaks when he wants you to understand exactly how deep the water is. "She's alive," he said. "For now. Mr. Crow keeps her someplace safe. See, she knows things. Things about what's under this ground." His eyes swept over Elias's land, the frozen fields, the ridge beyond. "There's something down there worth more than every acre in this valley." She found out. And a woman who knows too much is more useful breathing than buried, long as she stays quiet. He straightened up. "Same goes for her boy. He's leverage, Mr. Boone. You understand leverage?" Elias did. He understood it cold and clear. As long as they held Caleb, Margaret would do whatever they asked. And as long as they held Margaret, no truth would ever see daylight. "So, give us the boy," the man finished, "and everybody stays real comfortable." Elias let the silence stretch. The wind moved across the snow. His horse stamped once beneath him. "No," he said. The word came out simple. Small, but it filled the whole yard. The man's face went hard as flint. "You'll regret that." "Maybe," Elias said, "but you'll not have him. Not today. Not any day. You want that boy. You come through me, and I've got nothing left to lose." He let his hand rest plain on his rifle. "Ask around. You'll find that's true." For a moment, nobody moved. 4 riders, 1 cowboy, and the cold breathing down on all of them. Then the man in the coat gave a short, ugly laugh and wheeled his black horse around. "Have it your way, Boone," he called over his shoulder. "Mr. Crow's got all the time in the world. You don't." They rode off through the snow, 4 sets of hoofprints trailing dark behind them, until the rise swallowed them whole. Elias sat there long after they were gone. Only when the last echo of hooves faded did he let his breath out slow. His hands were shaking. He hadn't noticed till now. He rode into the yard and put his horse away with hands that still trembled. Then he went inside. The fire had burned down to a low orange glow. Reed was gone to check the far room, and there, wrapped in wool blankets on the cot pulled close to the hearth, lay Caleb. His chest rose and fell, faint but steady. His dark lashes lay against skin still too pale. In his small hand, even in sleep, he held that little wooden horse tight. Elias lowered himself into the chair beside the boy. He looked at that small face a long while. For years he had run. From the town, from folks, from the memory of a man he couldn't save, and a wife he buried in the cold. He had told himself he was a man who saved cattle and lost people. He had built his whole quiet life around that belief, and he had hidden inside it like a man hiding from a storm. But storms found you anyway. This one had blown a frozen child right onto his land. "I'm not running," Elias said softly. The words felt strange in his mouth. New. Not this time. He reached out and pulled the blanket up higher under Caleb's chin. The boy stirred, but didn't wake. "I'm going to keep you safe," Elias whispered. "I'm going to find your mama, and whatever's buried under this ground, whatever Crow's so afraid folks will learn." His jaw set firm. "I'm going to dig it up and hold it to the light." The fire popped. Outside, the wind moaned across the empty fields. But inside, in the warm orange glow, an old cowboy sat watch over a sleeping boy, and for the first time in more years than he could count, Elias Boone was not afraid of what came next. Morning came gray and cold. Elias had barely slept. He stood at the window watching the light creep over the snow, and he thought about the 4 riders, about the way that man had spoken of burning houses, like he was talking about the weather. Elias knew Crow would come back. Not today, maybe, but soon. And when he did, he would not send 4 men. He would send enough to finish it. So Elias got to work. He started with Caleb. The cot by the front hearth sat too close to the door, too close to the windows. Anyone riding up could see the boy through the glass. That would not do. Elias gathered the blankets in his arms and looked around the old farmhouse for someplace better. The root cellar came to mind first, but it was too cold down there, too damp. Caleb needed warmth. So Elias settled on the small back room where he and Clara had once planned to put a child. He had shut the door on that room years ago. Now he opened it. Dust hung thick in the air. A single window, small and high. Thick log walls on 3 sides. It was the warmest, most hidden corner of the house, and it sat far from any door a man might kick in. Elias built a fire in the little stove there. He dragged the cot in and laid Caleb down gentle as he could. The boy murmured, eyes fluttering, that wooden horse still clutched in his fist. "You rest," Elias whispered. "You're safe here. I promise." Once Caleb settled, Elias turned to the ranch. He walked the yard slow, seeing it now the way a man aiming a rifle might see it, where the fences stood weak, where a rider could come in unseen. He piled hay bales near the barn to break a charge. He checked his rifle and his old shotgun, cleaned them, laid out every shell he owned on the kitchen table. It wasn't much. 2 guns against Crow's men was hardly anything at all. That was when he knew he couldn't do this alone. The thought made his stomach twist. For years he had asked nobody for anything. Pride, or shame, or maybe just the habit of hiding. But pride wouldn't keep a boy alive. So Elias saddled his horse and rode to the nearest neighbor, old Hank Wheeler, whose land bordered his own to the south. He hadn't spoken to Hank in months, maybe longer. Hank came to the door with a suspicious squint that melted the moment Elias started talking. About the boy, about Crow, about the note that said, "Please don't let them take my son." Hank's face went still. "Crow," he said and spat into the snow. "That man took my brother's farm 3 winters back. Told us it was legal. Weren't nothing legal about it." He looked at Elias hard. "What do you need?" "Just whatever you can spare," Elias said. "And if it comes to trouble." He paused. "Someone standing beside me." Hank nodded slow. "I'll spread the word. Quiet-like." Elias rode to 2 more houses that day, saying the same words, half expecting doors to close in his face. They didn't. He rode home as the sun began to sink, not sure what he had set in motion, telling himself he'd be lucky if one man showed up. He was wrong. By evening they came. First, a single wagon, creaking up the frozen road. Then, another behind it. Then figures on foot and on horseback, lanterns swinging in the blue dusk. Hank Wheeler at the front, and behind him the baker with sacks of flour, the blacksmith with a bundle of tools, women carrying blankets and jars of preserves, men carrying rifles. Elias stood on his porch and watched them fill his yard, and his throat went tight. "Heard you got a boy needs looking after," Hank called out, climbing down from his wagon. "Heard you're fixing to stand up to Crow." He grinned. "Well, ain't nobody stood up to that man in a long time. Figured we'd come see it done right." Elias tried to speak and couldn't. He just nodded, blinking hard. The lonely ranch, silent for so many years, filled with voices and light, and the warm smell of bread. And for the first time since Clara, it felt like a home. The next morning, Doc Thomas Reed arrived just as the sun broke over the ridge. He was a lean man, with tired eyes, and a black bag worn soft at the corners. He had checked on Caleb twice already, and both times he had shaken his head and spoken careful words. Words like weakening, words like slipping. But this morning, Elias had something to show him. "You said his body was cold from the inside," Elias said, leading the doctor across the frozen yard. "Colder than any frostbite you ever seen." "That's right," Reed said, breath fogging the air. "I got no name for it. No treatment either. A body that cold should be dead." "Come with me," Elias said. He led the doctor past the barn, past the far pasture, to a place at the edge of his land where the ground dipped low between 2 rocky slopes. Snow lay heavy everywhere. But here, in this hollow, the snow was thin. Steam rose faint from a crack in the earth, curling up into the cold like breath from something alive. Reed stopped short. "Is that water?" Elias knelt beside the small pool. It sat dark and still, ringed with pale stones that seemed to glow soft in the morning light. He dipped his fingers in. Warm. Warm as a summer creek, though the world around it was locked in ice. "My daddy used to talk about this," Elias said quiet. "Said the old folks called it a healing spring. I always thought it was just a story." He looked up. "The minerals in Caleb's coat. They came from here. I'd stake my life on it." Reed crouched down, his logical mind fighting with his eyes. "That's not possible. Water don't stay warm through a winter like this." "I know." Elias filled a clean jar. "But I mean to find out." They carried the water back to the house, quick as they could without spilling it. In the little back room, Caleb lay pale on the cot. His lips had gone gray. His breath came out in tiny crystals, tinkling faint as they touched the air. That wooden horse still rested in his open hand, but his fingers had loosened around it. Reed touched the boy's forehead and frowned deep. "He's colder than yesterday, Elias. I won't lie to you." Elias soaked a cloth in the warm spring water. Gently, he pressed it to the boy's lips, letting a few drops slip into his mouth. For a long moment, nothing. Then Caleb stirred. His chest rose fuller. Color crept back into his cheeks, faint as dawn. His fingers tightened around the wooden horse, and his eyelids fluttered open, staring up at the low ceiling with a look of quiet wonder. "Mama," he whispered. "Mama said the water would help." Reed stumbled back a step, his hand pressed to his mouth. "I've been doctoring 30 years, he breathed. "I never seen anything like it. That water, it's doing what medicine can't." Elias barely heard him. He was staring at the jar, his heart pounding hard. "Mama said the water would help. The pieces came together all at once, like ice cracking on a river in spring." Margaret hadn't just hidden her boy in the snow and prayed. She had frozen him on purpose, using the minerals from this spring to slow his little body down, to keep him hovering between living and dying. And she had left him here, on Elias's land, right above the one thing that could bring him back. She had known. She had planned every step. She meant for me to find him, Elias said, his voice thick. This spring, it's the only thing keeping him alive. And Crow wants my land. He looked at Reed. He don't want the grass or the cattle. He wants this. That was when Hank's voice rang out sharp from the yard. Elias, you'd best come see this. Elias hurried out. Hank stood at the fence line, pointing toward the far pasture, near the hollow where the spring lay hidden. Fresh tracks cut through the snow. Boot prints, horse prints, circling the low ground, pressing close to the steaming crack in the earth. Someone had been out there in the night, searching, and they had found exactly what they were looking for. The days that followed felt like a slow thaw. Each morning, Elias carried a fresh jar of warm spring water into the back room. He soaked a cloth and pressed it to Caleb's lips, patient as ever. And each morning, the boy grew a little stronger. The gray left his skin. The frost stopped forming on his breath. His fingers, once stiff and cold, began to move freely again. By the third day, Caleb sat up on his own. "You hungry?" Elias asked, standing in the doorway with a bowl in his hands. Caleb nodded, slow and shy. Elias set the bowl on the small table by the cot. Warm broth with soft bits of potato and carrot floating in it. He handed the boy a spoon and watched him eat. Caleb ate careful at first, like he was afraid the food might disappear. Then hungrier, the spoon scraping the bottom of the bowl. "There now," Elias said soft. "That's more like it." Caleb looked up at him. "Can I have more?" Elias felt something warm move through his chest. Something he hadn't felt in years. "You can have all you want, son." By the fourth day, Caleb was talking. Not much, a few words here and there. But it was a start. He asked about the cattle. He asked about the barn. He asked why the horses breathed steam in the cold, and Elias explained it patient, the way he might have explained it to a child of his own, long ago. On the fifth day, Elias bundled Caleb up in an old coat and let him sit by the window. The boy watched the snow fall over the pasture, his eyes wide and quiet. "You want to see the horses up close?" Elias asked. Caleb turned. "Can I?" So Elias carried him out to the barn, wrapped tight against the cold. He set the boy down on a bale of hay near the stalls. A big bay mare poked her head out, curious, her breath warm and grassy. Caleb reached up with one careful hand. The mare lowered her nose and let him touch her. The boy laughed. It was a small sound, thin as a bird's, but it was a laugh. Elias hadn't heard laughter in this barn in a long, long time. "Her name's Juniper," Elias said, kneeling beside him. "She's gentle. Gentlest one I got." Caleb stroked the mare's soft nose. "My pa liked horses," he said quiet. "He carved me this one." He held up the little wooden horse he still carried everywhere. Its paint was worn thin from small hands. "That's a fine horse," Elias said. "Your pa did good work." Caleb's face went still. "He's gone now. Died last winter." Elias felt the words settle heavy in his chest. He knew that kind of loss. He knew how it hollowed a body out. "I'm sorry, Caleb," he said. "I know how that feels. I lost someone too. My wife. Her name was Clara." The boy looked at him with those solemn eyes, too old for his little face. "Does it stop hurting?" Elias was quiet a moment. He wanted to give the boy the truth. "No," he said gentle, "but it gets softer, like a fire burning down to warm coals. It don't burn so sharp after a while." Caleb nodded, like he understood. Then he leaned into Elias, just a little, just enough. That evening, back in the warm room, Elias tucked the boy under the blankets. Caleb held the wooden horse against his chest and stared up at him. "Mr. Elias," he said, "can I tell you something?" "Course you can." Caleb's voice dropped low, like he was sharing a secret. "The night the bad men came, Mama woke me up in the dark. She was scared. I could tell, even though she smiled." His little fingers tightened on the horse. "She put the special dust on me, from the water, and she buried me in the snow, out by the low place. She said it would keep me safe. She said to hold my breath long as I could, and not be afraid." Elias sat very still. "She kissed me right here." Caleb touched his forehead. "And she told me a good cowboy would find me. She promised. She said wait for the good cowboy, and he'll take care of you." The boy looked up at him, trusting and sure. "You're him, aren't you? You're the good cowboy she meant." The morning light came pale and gold through the frosted window. Elias had been awake since before dawn, sitting by the stove with a cup of coffee gone cold in his hands. Caleb's words from the night before still turned over in his mind. "You're him, aren't you? You're the good cowboy she meant." He didn't know if he was, but he knew he wanted to be. When Caleb woke, Elias helped him to the table and set down a plate of biscuits. Then he brought out the small bundle he'd found tucked inside the boy's coat that first night. He'd set it aside in the rush to keep Caleb alive. Now, in the quiet morning, it seemed important. "Caleb," Elias said gentle, "these are your ma's things. You reckon we ought to take a look? Might tell us where she is." Caleb chewed his biscuit slow, then nodded. Elias unwrapped the bundle careful on the table. Inside was a folded shawl, worn soft with use, a tin comb, a dried sprig of some flower, pressed flat and brittle, and at the bottom, wrapped in oilcloth, a small leather pouch. Caleb's eyes lit. "That's Mama's important bag. She never let me touch it." Elias worked the drawstring loose. Inside were papers, folded tight and stiff. But something was strange about them. The edges glinted, catching the light like frost on a window. He held one up. The paper had been coated in a thin, glass-like film, hard and clear, sealing the ink beneath it. "Well now," Elias murmured. He rubbed a corner between his fingers. The coating didn't flake. It didn't smear. It felt cool to the touch, almost like the spring water when it dried on his hands. "That's the special dust," Caleb said quiet. "Same as she put on me. It came from the water under the ground. She said it keeps things safe, keeps them from getting ruined." Elias felt a chill move through him that had nothing to do with the cold. Margaret hadn't just used the spring to save her son. She'd used it to protect these papers, to make sure the truth couldn't rot away, or wash out, or burn. He carried the papers to the window where the light was best and began to read. The first page was a land deed. Elias recognized the name at the top. The Halloran farm, out past the East Ridge. He remembered the Hallorans. Good folks. They'd left the territory sudden 2 winters back, folks said, sold up and moved on. But here in Margaret's careful hand was a note pinned to the deed. Forced sale. Threats made against the children. See letter dated March. Elias turned the page. There was the letter. A copy of one written by Silas Crow himself, the ink preserved clear as the day it was set down. It spoke plain, though the words were dressed in politeness. It told the Hallorans they had 30 days to sign over their land, or the bank Crow owned would call in a debt they'd never truly owed. And if they went to the marshal, the letter said, well. Accidents happened to families who couldn't keep quiet. Elias's jaw went tight. There were more, page after page, a list of names he half remembered, families who'd vanished quiet in the night, farms bought for pennies. A man named Josiah Pike, who'd stood up at a town meeting to challenge Crow's water rights, found dead a week later at the bottom of a dry well, ruled an accident by a judge who happened to owe Crow money. Margaret had written it all down, dates, names, what was said, and who said it. She'd gathered the evidence piece by piece, careful and brave, and she'd sealed it in the minerals from the spring so it would never fade. Elias set the papers down slow. His hands weren't quite steady. He understood now. Margaret hadn't run from Crow because she was afraid. She'd run because she carried the one thing that could bring the whole rotten empire down. Proof. Cold, plain, undeniable proof that Silas Crow had stolen land, threatened families, and buried anyone who stood in his way. And she'd trusted all of it, and her son, to a stranger she'd never met. To him. The town hall smelled of dust and cold ash. Elias stood at the front, the papers laid out careful on the long table before him. He'd asked Doc Reed to help spread the word, and now the room was near full. Farmers with weathered hands, shopkeepers still wearing their aprons, mothers holding babies close against the chill. Faces he'd known his whole life, and hadn't truly looked at in years. He'd left Caleb back at the ranch with the baker's wife, safe and warm. This was no place for the boy. Elias cleared his throat. His voice came rough at first, out of practice. "Most of you know me," he said, "or knew me, back when Clara was alive. I've kept to myself a long time. Reckon I got no right asking you to listen now, but I'm asking anyway." He picked up the first paper. The glass-like coating caught the lamplight and threw it soft across the room. "This here is the Halloran deed, and this is a letter Silas Crow wrote them, telling them to sign over their land or lose their children." He set it down and lifted another. "This is about Josiah Pike. You all remember Josiah. Died in a dry well, they said. An accident. But Crow threatened him first. It's written here plain, in Crow's own words." A murmur moved through the crowd. Uneasy, frightened. Elias kept going, name after name, farm after farm. He watched the faces change as he spoke. Some went pale. Some looked at the floor. A few looked toward the door, like they wanted nothing more than to leave. When he finished, the silence hung heavy. Then, a man in the back stood. It was Hollis, who ran the feed store. "That's all fine and good, Elias. But you know what Crow is. You put your name against him. You're a dead man. Your ranch burns. Your family disappears." He shook his head. "I got young ones. I can't." "He's right," said a woman near the front. "Crow owns the bank. He owns the judge. He owns half the marshals from here to the Capitol. What good's paper against all that?" Elias felt the fear in the room like a cold draft under the door. He couldn't blame them. He'd lived in that same fear for years, only he'd called it grief. "I know what he is," Elias said quiet. "Better than most. I spent a long time believing there wasn't a thing I could do that mattered. That every time I tried to help somebody, I'd only fail." He looked down at the papers. "But a woman I never met trusted me with her boy and with the truth. She near died to get this proof to us. She didn't do that so we could hide it in a drawer and keep on being afraid." He lifted his eyes to the crowd. "Crow's power comes from us being alone. Every family he broke one at a time. Quiet, in the dark. So the rest of us could tell ourselves it wasn't our trouble." His voice grew steady. "But it was. It always was. And if we stand together now, all of us, there ain't enough hired guns in the territory to stop the whole of Willow Creek." Nobody spoke, but nobody left either. Then, from a bench near the wall, an old man rose slow to his feet. His hair was white as the snow outside, his back bent from years of hard labor. It was Amos Carver, who'd worked Crow's cattle for near 2 decades before his knees gave out. The room went still. "I seen things," Amos said, his voice cracking like dry leather. "Things I ain't never told a soul. I was there the night they came for the Hallorans. I held the horses. I looked the other way." His eyes shone wet in the lamplight. "I told myself I was just a hired man, that it weren't my doing, but I carried it every day since." He looked at Elias, then at the papers, then out at all the frightened faces he'd known his whole life. "I'm an old man. Crow can't take much from me now that time ain't already taking." His jaw firmed. "If you're standing up, Elias Boone, then so am I. I'll tell what I saw. To the marshal, to a judge, to God himself if I have to." A woman near the front began to cry, soft, and Hollis, who'd said he couldn't, stood up slow beside the old man. "Then I reckon I can't sit while Amos stands," he said. One by one, others began to rise. The days that followed carried a strange new lightness to them. Word spread quiet through Willow Creek. Folks came and went from Elias's ranch now, more than they had in years. Amos Carver rode out one morning with 2 younger men to help mend the fences Crow's riders had torn down. Hollis brought grain feed and wouldn't take a cent for it. Doc Reed came near every day, checking on Caleb, measuring the boy's breath and the color in his cheeks. And the boy was healing. Elias saw it plain. The gray had left Caleb's skin. His fingers no longer felt like river stones in winter. He ate now, real food, not just broth spooned drop by drop. Some mornings Elias would find him already up, sitting by the window with the little wooden horse in his hands, watching the light come over the snow. "You're up early," Elias said one such morning, pulling on his coat. Caleb turned. There was a shy sort of smile on his face, the kind that took work to give. "I wanted to see the horses." Elias paused at the door. Then he held out his hand. "Well, come on then. Can't see 'em from in here." They walked out to the barn together, the cold sharp and clean around them. The mare in the far stall nickered as they came near. Caleb stopped short, uncertain, tucked half behind Elias's leg. "She won't hurt you," Elias said. He crouched down beside the boy. "Here, give me your hand." He took Caleb's small hand in his own, calloused and warm, and guided it up slow to the mare's soft nose. The horse breathed against the boy's palm. Caleb's eyes went wide as dinner plates. "She's saying hello," Elias said. A laugh burst out of Caleb, bright and sudden, like something that had been locked up a long while and finally sprung loose. Elias felt that laugh go clear through him. It reached a cold place he'd near forgot he had, and it warmed it. He hadn't heard a child laugh in his barn since before Clara passed. The work went easier after that. Caleb followed him about like a shadow, small and steady, asking questions in his quiet way. "What's this rope for? Why does the mare stamp her foot? Does the cold hurt the cows?" Elias answered everyone. He found he liked answering. He found the days had shape to them now, a reason to rise before the sun. In the evenings they sat by the fire. Elias whittled. He'd taken to carving again, something he hadn't touched since Clara. His hands remembered the way of it. He made Caleb a little cow to go with the horse, then a dog, then a barn no bigger than his fist. Caleb lined them up along the hearthstones like a whole tiny ranch of his own. "You're good at this," Caleb said one night, holding the little dog up to the firelight. Clara used to say the same. Elias smiled soft. "My wife, she's gone now. But she'd have liked you. She liked most everybody, truth be told. Even the folks who didn't deserve it." Caleb was quiet a while. The fire popped and hissed. "My pa liked to make things too," the boy said finally. "That's how come I got the horse." He turned it over in his hands, careful, like it might break. "He's gone too." Elias set down his knife. He looked at the boy across the fire, this small, brave soul who'd been through more than any child ought. "I know," he said gentle. "I'm real sorry, Caleb." The boy didn't cry. He just nodded, the way folks do when a hurt has lived in them long enough to grow quiet. Then Caleb looked up. His eyes searched Elias's face, hopeful and scared all at once. "Mr. Elias," he said, "can I stay? Here, I mean. Can this be my home?" The question hung in the warm air between them. Elias felt his throat go tight. He came around the fire and knelt down before the boy. took both his small hands in his own. "Caleb," he said, and his voice shook. "You listen to me now. This is your home, for as long as you want it, and I ain't never gonna leave you. Not ever. You hear me? That's a promise." The word came from Doc Reed. He rode out at dusk 2 days later, his horse lathered from the hard push through the drifts. Elias met him at the door before he'd even climbed down. "I know where she is," Reed said, breathless. "Margaret. One of Hollis' cousins does hauling for Crow's men. Saw a woman kept in the old line shack past Miller's Ridge. Boarded up. 2 guards." Elias felt his heart kick hard against his ribs. He glanced back at the house, where Caleb slept warm by the fire. "Then we go tonight," he said. They gathered quiet in the barn by lantern light. Amos Carver came, his old rifle slung across his back and his jaw set firm. Hollis came too, and 2 of the younger men who'd helped mend the fences. Doc Reed brought his bag. Nobody said much. They didn't need to. Every man there knew what Crow had taken from this town, and every man was tired of being afraid. "Miller's Ridge is a hard ride in this cold," Elias told them. "We go careful. We go quiet. No shooting unless there's no other way. We get her out, and we get gone." Amos nodded slow. "Been waitin' years for a night like this, Elias." They rode out under a sky thick with stars. The snow lay blue and silent all around them, and the cold bit through every coat and glove. Elias led them off the main trail, up through the timber where the drifts ran deep, but the trees hid their passing. He knew this country. He'd ridden it 1,000 times checking cattle, and he knew where Crow's riders kept their patrols along the low road. Twice they stopped, still as stone, while horsemen passed below them on the trail. Elias held his breath and watched the dark shapes move by, lanterns swinging. His hand rested on his horse's neck, keeping the animal calm. The riders never looked up. When they'd gone, the men breathed again and pushed on. The line shack sat hunched in a clearing past the ridge, a low, black shape against the snow. One window glowed dim. 2 men stood by a fire near the door, stamping their feet. Rifles leaned against the wall behind them. Elias signaled a halt. They left the horses in the trees and crept forward on foot, spread wide through the shadows. "Amos, Hollis, take the far side," Elias whispered. "The rest with me, when I give the word." They waited. The guards laughed at something, passed a bottle between them. Elias's heart hammered, but his hands stayed steady. He thought of Caleb sleeping. He thought of the promise he'd made. He would not fail this time. He gave the word. They came out of the dark all at once, quiet and fast. The 2 guards barely had time to reach for their rifles before Amos and Hollis were on them. There was a short scuffle, a grunt, a curse cut short. Then it was over. The guards lay bound and gagged in the snow, and no shot had been fired. Elias ran to the door. It was barred from the outside with a heavy plank. He lifted it and shoved the door open. Inside, in the dim light of a single stub of candle, a woman sat huddled against the far wall. Her wrists were tied. Her face was thin and pale, but her eyes came up sharp and fierce, ready to fight. "Margaret Turner," Elias said soft. The fierceness broke. Her lips trembled. "Who are you?" "My name's Elias Boone." He crossed the room and knelt, working the knots loose from her wrists. "Your boy sent me. Caleb. He's safe. He's alive, and he's waiting on you." A sound came out of her, half a sob, half a cry she'd been holding back for weeks. "Caleb. He made it." "He made it," Elias said. "He's been asking for his mama." They rode back through the last dark hours before dawn. Margaret, wrapped in Amos's spare coat, held tight in the saddle before Elias. She said little. She just stared ahead toward the ranch, toward her son, like a woman who'd forgotten how to hope and was learning it fresh. The window glowed gold as they came up the lane. Caleb must have heard the horses. The door flew open, and there he stood, small in his nightshirt, the wooden horse clutched in his hand. "Mama!" Margaret was off the horse before Elias could help her down. She stumbled through the snow and dropped to her knees, and Caleb ran into her arms, and the two of them held on like the whole world might tear them apart again. "My baby," Margaret wept into his hair. "My sweet boy, I'm here. I'm here now." Elias stood back by the horses and watched. Behind him the men were quiet, hats in hand. The cold no longer seemed to reach him. He felt his eyes sting, and he let them. For the first time in a long, long while, Elias Boone felt like he'd done something right. Morning came soft and gold over the ranch. Elias woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of low voices. He came into the kitchen to find Margaret at the stove, a blanket around her shoulders, stirring a pot of oats. Caleb sat at the table close beside her, so close their arms touched, like he was afraid she might vanish if he looked away. "You didn't have to cook," Elias said. "I wanted to." Margaret gave a small, tired smile. "It's been a long time since I made breakfast for my boy." She'd slept some, though not much. There were shadows under her eyes. But the fierce look was still there, banked low like coals under ash. They ate quiet for a while. Then Margaret set down her spoon. "You've been good to us, Mr. Boone. Better than we had any right to expect from a stranger." She looked at Caleb, then back at Elias. "You deserve to know why Crow wants this land so bad." Elias leaned back in his chair. "I've been wondering that a good while now. It's the spring." She said it plain. "The one under your ground. My husband Daniel, he was a surveyor before he passed. He studied water and rock and minerals. He found out that spring wasn't just water, something in it, something that heals, something that keeps." Her hands tightened around her cup. "Crow found out too, and Crow doesn't share. He never has. So he means to take the ranch," Elias said. "Worse than that." Margaret's voice dropped low, so Caleb had to lean in to hear. "He doesn't just want the spring. He means to destroy the old records first. The ones that prove what he did to get all this land. The farms he stole. The families he ran off. The ones who wouldn't sell." She swallowed hard. "The ones who ended up in shallow graves, Mr. Boone." Elias felt cold move through him that had nothing to do with the winter. "I gathered proof," Margaret went on. "Contracts, letters, names and dates. I used the spring water to preserve them so the ink wouldn't fade, so no fire could touch them easy. I hid them where only Caleb and I would know." Her eyes shone. "That's why he took me. That's why he hunted my boy. He knows those papers can hang him." The kitchen was still. Outside, the wind had died, and the morning lay bright and clean over the snow. "Then we show them," Elias said. "The whole town. Doc Reed, Amos, all of them. We put the truth where every soul in Willow Creek can see it, and we do it loud enough that no crooked judge can bury it." Margaret studied his face like she was trying to believe him. "You'd do that. For people you barely know. They ain't strangers no more." Elias thought of the men who'd ridden with him in the dark. The bread left on his step. The little toys the children had carved for Caleb. This town's been afraid a long time. Maybe it's time somebody reminded them they don't have to be. By mid-morning, the word had gone out. Doc Reed rode from house to house, quiet and steady, and one by one the folk of Willow Creek came. They gathered in Elias's barn, stamping snow from their boots, faces wary but listening. Margaret stood before them with the color coming back into her cheeks, and she told them everything. She told them about the spring, about the papers, about the neighbors who'd disappeared, and the lies Crow had spread to cover it. When she finished, nobody spoke for a moment. Then old Amos Carver stood up, his hat crushed in his fist. "I lost my brother to that man," he said, voice rough. "Never could prove it. Been carrying it 15 years. He looked around at his neighbors. "I say, we finish this." A murmur went through the crowd. Then a shout of agreement. Then the whole barn rose up as one. Elias watched it happen with something warm swelling in his chest. Fear was leaving these people. He could see it going, like frost melting off a window pane. Later, when the crowd had thinned and plans were set, Elias stepped out into the bright, cold air. Caleb was in the yard, cheeks red, laughing as he chased Hollis's old dog through the drifts. The wooden horse stuck up from his coat pocket. He looked, for the first time, like an ordinary boy on an ordinary winter day. Margaret came and stood beside Elias, watching her son. "He hasn't laughed like that in a long time," she said soft. Elias smiled. The papers were safe. The town was standing tall. Margaret was free, and Caleb was healing more each day. For the first time, it felt like the danger was nearly behind them. Like justice was close enough now to reach out and take hold of. They came in the black hours, when the moon had slipped behind the clouds and the whole valley lay silent under its blanket of snow. Elias never heard the horses. They'd wrapped the hooves in cloth, muffled the bits so no jingle carried on the wind. The first he knew of it was a sound that didn't belong. A dull crack, out past the barn, sharp against the stillness. He was up before he was awake, boots half on, rifle in his hand. Through the frosted window he saw them, shapes moving fast in the dark. 4, maybe 5, their lanterns hooded down to slivers of light. They were down by the spring, where the old stone housing stood, where Elias had rigged the covers and pipes that kept the water clean and flowing. Another crack, the screech of iron tearing loose. "No!" Elias breathed. He threw open the door and ran, the cold biting through his shirt, snow soaking through his boots. He shouted. He fired once into the air, the shot rolling across the valley like thunder. One of the shapes turned toward him, and for a moment Elias saw a face he half knew. One of Crow's hired guns, mouth twisted in a grin. Then the man swung something heavy. Elias heard the crash before he understood it. The stone cover over the spring split and fell. A dark shape emptied a barrel into the water, something thick and foul that Elias could smell even from here, sharp and oily, wrong. "Stop!" he roared. He raised the rifle again. But they were already mounting up, fast, practiced. The horses wheeled and were gone into the dark before he could close the distance. Hooves swallowed by cloth and snow. By the time Elias reached the spring, breathing hard, there was nothing left but ruin. The housing was smashed, the pipes torn free and bent. And the water, the clear water that had run pure as glass, now ran cloudy and dark, a slick shimmer sliding across its surface in the thin lantern light he'd grabbed. Elias sank to his knees at the edge of it. He plunged his hands in, as if he could scoop the poison out, as if he could undo it. The water was cold and slick and stank of tar. He knew, deep down, there was no undoing this. Not tonight. Not with his bare hands. Behind him, a light came bobbing across the yard. Margaret, a coat thrown over her nightclothes, Caleb's small hand clutched in hers. "Elias?" Her voice shook. "What happened? We heard shots." He couldn't answer at first. He just looked at the black water, and then at her, and she read it all in his face. "Oh, no," she whispered. "No, no." Caleb said nothing. He stood there in the snow, staring at the ruined spring, and something in his small face went still. They got no more sleep that night. Morning came gray and heavy. No gold this time. The clouds hung low and mean over the valley, and the wind had picked up again, carrying the first spits of new snow. Caleb wouldn't get up. Margaret found him in the little bed Elias had made him, curled tight, and when she touched his cheek, she pulled her hand back like she'd been burned. "Elias." Her voice cracked down the middle. "Elias, come quick." He was there in an instant. The boy's skin had gone pale as the frost on the glass. His lips were tinged blue. And when Elias laid a hand on the child's chest, he He felt it, that terrible, familiar cold, spreading out from somewhere deep inside him. Not the cold of a winter morning. The cold of the snowbank where Elias had first found him. The cold that came from within. His breath, Margaret said, and Elias saw it too. Each small exhale hung in the air in tiny glittering crystals, the way it had that first night. The freezing had come back. Caleb's eyes fluttered open, dull and far away. He looked up at Elias, and his cracked lips moved, but no sound came. Elias gathered him up, blanket and all, and held him close, trying to press his own warmth into that small, cold body. But it was like holding a stone taken from a river in January. The heat just poured out and away and never came back. "Stay with me," Elias whispered. "Stay with me, son. Please." The boy's eyes drifted shut, and Elias felt the old darkness rise up in him, the one he knew so well, the voice that had followed him for years across every cold and empty mile. "You lose people. You always have." He held the freezing child and watched him slip away, and he believed with everything in him that he had failed again. Elias sat by the fire with Caleb in his arms, and the flames did nothing. He'd built it high, piled on wood until the heat pushed back the corners of the room. But the boy stayed cold. That deep, wrong cold, the kind no fire could reach. Margaret knelt beside them, rubbing Caleb's small hands between her own. Her eyes were red. She hadn't stopped moving all morning, fetching blankets, warming stones, brewing broth that went cold before Caleb could take a drop. Elias looked at her over the top of the boy's head. "There's a way to end this," he said. His voice was rough, low. "One way." Margaret went still. "What do you mean?" "Crow wants the land." Elias stared into the fire. "He always has. The spring, the ranch, all of it. If I give it to him, he's got no reason to keep coming. No reason to poison the water again. No reason to hunt Caleb." He swallowed hard. "I sign it over. Today. And you take your boy somewhere far from here, somewhere crows never heard of, and you start over." "Elias, it's just land, Margaret." He said it fast, before she could argue, before he could talk himself out of it. "It's just dirt and stone. It's not worth his life. Nothing is." For a long moment she didn't speak. The fire popped. Outside, the new snow came down soft against the window. Then Margaret shook her head. Slow. "Sure." "No," she said. Elias looked up. "You think it stops with you?" Her voice was quiet, but there was iron underneath it. "You think a man like Silas Crow takes what he wants, and then just leaves folks alone?" She let out a breath, sharp and bitter. "He took my husband's land the same way. Papers and lawyers and threats in the dark. And when my brother started asking questions, when he found out how Crow was doing it, Crow made him disappear too. I watched it, Elias. I watched a good man get swallowed whole because everybody around him decided it was easier to give in than to fight." Elias said nothing. "If you hand him this ranch," Margaret went on, "he doesn't stop. He just gets stronger. Then it's the next family, and the next. Every farm in this valley, every child, every honest soul who ever crossed him." Her hand tightened around Caleb's fingers. "You'd be saving my boy today and feeding him to Crow's world tomorrow, a world where men like that always win. Is that the safe place you want to send him?" The words landed heavy. Elias felt them settle into his chest, right beside the old darkness that was already there. "I don't know how to beat a man like that," he admitted. The truth of it shamed him. "I'm one rancher, Margaret. One old cowboy with a broken spring and a rifle. He's got money. He's got guns. He's got judges in his pocket." He looked down at Caleb, at the blue creeping into the boy's lips. "And I've got a child dying in my arms because I couldn't stop them the first time." "You're not one man." Margaret's voice cracked. "Not anymore. The baker came. The blacksmith came. Those children left toys at your door. You just haven't noticed you stopped being alone? Elias closed his eyes. He wanted to believe her. God help him. He wanted to. But the fear was old, and it was strong, and it whispered the same thing it always did. You lose people. You run because running is the only thing that ever kept you from watching them go. His hands trembled. He was already picturing it. The papers, Crow's grin, the empty road out of the valley. Then, something moved against his chest. Small, weak, barely there. Elias looked down. Caleb's eyes had opened. Just a sliver, dull and far away, fighting up through all that cold. His hand, so cold it hurt to hold, had found Elias's wrist. The fingers curled, held on. The boy's lips moved. It took everything he had to make the sound. You promised, Caleb whispered. You promised you wouldn't leave. Elias stopped breathing. Every excuse, every fear, every dark whisper he'd carried for years went silent, all at once. He looked at that small, cold hand gripping his wrist, at the trust still burning in those tired eyes, even now, even after everything. And something in Elias Boone that had been frozen a very long time began, at last, to thaw. Elias tucked the blanket tight around Caleb and looked up at Margaret. Stay with him, he said. Keep him near the springstones. I've got somewhere to be. He pulled on his coat. His hands weren't shaking anymore. The ride into Willow Creek was hard. The wind cut through his coat, and the snow came sideways. But Elias didn't slow. For years he'd ridden into that town with his head down, dodging kind words, wanting only to buy his supplies and get back to his empty ranch. Not today. He rode straight to the church steps in the middle of the square. Then he did something he hadn't done in a long time. He asked for help. He knocked on doors. He walked into the general store, the smithy, the bakery warm with the smell of bread. He told folks to come to the square. Word spread the way it does in small towns, mouth to mouth, faster than any letter. By the time the light went gray, they'd gathered, 20, 30 of them, bundled against the cold, breath rising in white clouds. The baker, with flour still on his apron. The blacksmith, big arms crossed. Mothers with children clinging to their skirts. Old men who leaned on canes. They watched Elias climb the church steps, and their faces held the same thing his own had held for years. Fear. Elias looked at them. His throat felt tight. He wasn't a man for speeches, but he thought of a small, cold hand gripping his wrist, and he found the words. Most of you know me, he said, or you knew me before. Elias Boone, the rancher who kept to himself, the man who stopped coming around. He swallowed. I've been running for a long time. Running from a night years back, when I couldn't save somebody who needed saving. I told myself that was just who I was. A man who loses people. The square was silent. Even the wind seemed to hush. 2 nights ago, Silas Crow sent his men to my land. They smashed the spring, the one that's keeping a sick boy alive right now. A boy somebody hid in the snow to save from Crow. He let that settle. And I know why Crow did it. Not just to hurt that child. He did it to hurt us. To remind us what happens when we don't roll over. He wants us scared. Scared and quiet and alone. Because a scared man alone is easy to beat. He saw heads nod, slow. He saw the baker's jaw tighten. Margaret Turner told me something today, Elias went on. She said I wasn't one man anymore. She was right. And I was too blind to see it. The baker brought food to my door. The blacksmith fixed my fence. Children left toys for a boy they never met. His voice broke, and he let it. That's not what a beaten town does. That's what a family does. He looked out at them, every cold and weary face. Crow took your farms. He took my neighbor's brother. He's been taking from every one of us for years, and we let him. Because it felt safer to give in than to stand up. But I'm done giving in. He straightened. I'm asking you to help me rebuild that spring. To help me protect that ranch. Not for me. For that boy. For your own children. For every soul this man ever swallowed whole. I can't do it alone." He drew a breath. "But I don't think I have to. Not anymore." For a long moment nobody moved. Then, the blacksmith stepped forward. He set his big hand on the church rail beside Elias. "I've got tools," he said, "and 2 strong sons. We'll come." The baker stepped up next. "My wagon can haul lumber." Then a woman. Then an old farmer. Then more and more, until the whole square was moving. Voices rising, plans forming, the fear breaking apart like ice under a spring thaw. They rode out to the ranch before full dark. All of them. And by the light of lanterns and bonfires, they worked. Elias watched it happen, and could scarcely believe it. The blacksmith and his sons hauled the shattered stones back into place around the spring. The baker's wagon groaned under fresh timber. Women boiled water and carried steaming kettles. Children gathered scattered tools from the snow. Old men held lanterns high so the workers could see. Hammers rang out into the cold night. Saws bit into wood. Somewhere, somebody started to sing, and others joined in, and the sound of it carried warm across the frozen yard. Elias worked alongside them, his hands raw, his back aching, and for the first time in more years than he could count, he felt something he'd forgotten how to feel. He looked up from the spring, saw the faces around him, lit gold by the fires, saw the ranch that had felt like a graveyard, now full of life and noise and purpose. He was not standing alone. He never had to again. It was Doc Reed who found it. The town doctor had come out with the others, his black bag slung over his shoulder, and his sleeves rolled up despite the cold. He was on his knees in the mud and slush near the broken well, digging with his bare hands beside the blacksmith's oldest son. The lantern light shook over his face. His breath came in quick, white puffs. "Elias!" he called. "Elias, come here! Quick!" Something in his voice made Elias drop his hammer. He crossed the yard, boots crunching, heart already climbing into his throat. "What is it?" Doc Reed didn't answer right away. He was staring down into the hole where Crow's men had smashed the stone ring. The old spring bed was ruined, cracked apart, the shallow pool gone gray and muddy where the frost had crept in. For 2 days it had looked dead. Elias had feared it truly was. But now the doctor reached down and pressed his palm flat against the wet earth at the very bottom. "Feel that," he said. Elias knelt beside him. He pulled off his glove and laid his own raw hand against the ground. It was warm, not hot, just faintly warm, like the belly of a stone that had been sitting in the sun. In all that biting cold, in all that snow and wind, the earth beneath the broken spring was warm. "They didn't kill it," Doc Reed whispered. He looked up, and his tired eyes were shining. "Elias, they only broke the top of it, the part we could see. But look here." He dug faster now, scooping mud aside, and the blacksmith's son dug with him. A few of the others gathered close, lanterns bobbing. And there, deeper down, past the shattered stones and the ruined pool, water began to well up. Clear water, clean water. It bubbled slow from a crack far below, and it steamed faintly in the lantern light, curling up into the freezing air like breath. "There's a second source," Doc Reed said. His voice cracked with wonder. "Deeper than the one Crow found. His men never even reached it. Whatever's down there, it runs too deep for a few hired thugs with hammers to touch." Elias stared at the rising water. Something loosened in his chest. Some knot he'd carried so long he'd forgotten it was there. "It was here the whole time," he said softly. "Underneath. Just waiting." "Just waiting," the doctor agreed. The word went out across the yard the way it had gone through town. Mouth to mouth. "The spring's alive. It's deeper than we knew. They can't kill it." The hammering seemed to pick up. The singing grew louder. The blacksmith let out a great booming laugh that rolled across the snow. They worked through the night with fresh strength. They set the stones back around the new, deeper source, cupping it, guarding it. Doc Reed dipped a clean tin cup into the clear water and held it up. Even in the lantern light, Elias could see the faint shimmer in it, the same shimmer that had come off the stones near Caleb's bed. "Bring it inside," Doc Reed said. "Bring it to the boy. Now, before it cools." Elias took the cup in both hands like it was something holy and carried it into the house. Margaret was there beside Caleb, her hand on his small chest. The boy's lips had gone bluish again. His breath made those tiny crystals in the air, the freezing creeping back the way it had before. Margaret looked up, and Elias saw her fear. "We found it," he said. "Deeper down. It's still good." He knelt. Margaret lifted Caleb's head. Elias touched the warm cup to the boy's cold lips, tilting it slow, letting a trickle pass between them. For a moment, nothing. Then Caleb swallowed. A shudder ran through the small body. Color crept into his cheeks, faint as dawn. The blue faded from his lips. His breath came out and, for the first time in hours, it did not turn to crystals in the air. Margaret gasped. Her hand flew to her mouth. Caleb's eyes fluttered open. They found Elias's face. "You came back," the boy whispered. Elias felt his own eyes sting. Behind him, in the doorway, the doctor and the neighbors crowded close, and someone let out a soft cry of joy. The warmth was winning. The boy was coming back. Morning came soft and gold over the ranch. The storm had finally broken. For the first time in days, the sky stretched clear and pale blue above the snow, and the world looked washed clean. Caleb slept peaceful in the back room, his cheeks pink now, his breath steady. Margaret had sat beside him half the night just watching him breathe. But when the sun rose, she came out to find Elias by the spring, and together they went to the place where the old evidence had been hidden. The deeper source had changed things. Where the shallow pool once sat, the new water welled up clear and warm, and along its stone edges the strange shimmer clung thick as morning frost. Margaret knelt beside a flat rock at the water's lip. She brushed away the mud with careful fingers. "My brother showed me this trick," she said quietly. "The water preserves things. Paper, ink, even words scratched in tin. It holds them the way ice holds a leaf. Nothing rots, nothing fades." Elias watched her lift a wrapped bundle from a hollow beneath the stone. It was sealed in oilcloth, and when she peeled it open, the papers inside were dry and whole. He'd expected them ruined, but the shimmering water had kept them perfect. "These are the ones I hid first," Margaret said, "before they took me. But there's more, down deeper. I never had time to reach it." Elias rolled up his sleeve and reached into the warm water. His fingers found another bundle, wedged in a crack far below. He drew it out slow. Water streamed off it, and it too was dry inside, protected by the strange minerals. They spread the papers on the kitchen table while the fire crackled. Margaret read them aloud, her voice growing stronger with each one. "Land deeds," she said. "Signed under threat. Look, this one belonged to the Hollis family. Crow's men burned their barn the week before they signed. And this." She held up a folded letter. "A confession. One of his own hired men wrote it. He named the others. He named the night they killed old Samuel Pike and called it an accident." Elias's jaw tightened. He knew the Pike name. Everyone in Willow Creek did. They'd buried Samuel 2 winters back and called it a fall from his horse. Nobody had questioned it. Nobody had dared. "There are names here," Margaret went on. Her finger moved down the page. "Witnesses. People who saw and stayed quiet because they were afraid. The Hollis widow, the blacksmith's cousin, old Ruth from the mercantile." She looked up, her eyes bright. "Elias, these people are still alive. They can speak. If they see the proof, if they know they won't stand alone, they'll testify." Elias picked up one of the deeds. The shimmer still clung faintly to the paper. He thought of all the families in that valley who'd lost land, lost fathers, lost hope, and had swallowed it down because Silas Crow owned the judge and the law and the very ground they walked on. But he didn't own this. He didn't own the truth pulled from the earth beneath Elias's own ranch. He thought breaking the spring would bury it forever, Elias said. He never knew it ran deeper than his hammers could reach. Margaret laid her hand over his. Neither did you, until yesterday. He looked at her. Then he looked toward the back room where Caleb slept, safe and warm. A boy he'd nearly ridden past in the snow. A boy who'd whispered his mother said the cowboy would come. Something had changed in Elias, and he felt it now, like the warmth rising from the spring. For years, he'd called himself a man who saved cattle and lost people. He'd hidden on this ranch, punishing himself for the one he couldn't reach in time. He'd been sure, down to his bones, that he was the last man on earth fit to protect anyone. He wasn't that man anymore. He gathered the papers into a neat stack and pressed them flat with both hands. His voice came steady and low. Then it's time the whole town hears it, he said. Every name, every crime, out loud, in the open, where Crow can't buy the silence back. He stood, and he reached for his coat. Silas Crow rode into Willow Creek just after noon. He came with 6 riders at his back, and a look on his face like a man who had already won. His coat was black wool, thick and fine. His horse was a big gray stallion, the kind that cost more than most families in the valley earned in a year. He rode slow and deliberate, the way a man does when he wants everyone to see him coming. He expected empty streets. He did not get them. The first thing he saw when he rounded the corner of the main road was people. Lots of them. They stood in rows along both sides of the dirt road, quiet and still, bundled in coats and scarves against the cold. Farmers, mothers, old men with weathered faces, children pressed close to their parents' sides. The blacksmith stood with his arms crossed, his big frame solid as iron. Old Ruth from the mercantile had her hands folded in front of her, her chin lifted. The Hollis widow stood near the front, her eyes red from crying, but her back straight as a post. Crow pulled his horse to a stop. His riders fanned out behind him, but they shifted in their saddles. This was not what they had expected either. At the far end of the road, standing just in front of the sheriff's office, was Elias Boone. He stood alone at first glance. But he was not alone. Dr. Thomas Reed stood to his left, with a satchel full of papers. Margaret Turner stood to his right, her head high and her expression steady, and just behind them both, bundled in a thick coat with a small wooden horse tucked under one arm, was Caleb. Crow's jaw tightened. His eyes moved across the crowd. He was reading them the way a man reads a map, looking for the weak spot, the gap, the place where fear might still live. He nudged his horse forward slowly. "Boone!" he called out. His voice was smooth and cold. "You look like a man who made a choice he can't take back." Elias did not move. He just watched Crow come. "I did make a choice," Elias said. His voice carried easy down the road. "I chose not to bury the truth." Crow pulled his horse up a few feet away. He looked down from the saddle with those flat gray eyes. "You've got some papers," he said. "Some frightened people and some old gossip from a spring on a broken-down ranch." He let a thin smile cross his face. "That's not enough." Margaret stepped forward. She held up a document, neat and folded, and her voice rang out clear for everyone on that road to hear. "This is a signed confession from your own hired man. It names the night Samuel Pike was murdered. It names who gave the order." She turned slightly, speaking not just to Crow, but to the people gathered around them. "It names Silas Crow." A sound moved through the crowd. Not loud, just a low, collective breath. The sound of people hearing something they had suspected for years, spoken out loud for the very first time. Crow's smile faded. One of his riders leaned close and said something low. Crow gave a small, sharp shake of his head. Elias stepped forward then. Just one step, but it was enough. "You've been running this valley on fear for a long time," he said. He kept his voice calm. "You bought judges. You burned barns. You made people so scared they wouldn't even say a dead man's name out loud." He looked straight up at Crow. "But fear only holds as long as people think they're standing alone." He glanced back at the crowd, all those faces looking forward. All those people who had swallowed their grief and their anger for years, finally standing in the open air together. "They're not alone anymore," Elias said. He brought his eyes back to Crow. "You thought owning land made you powerful. But land doesn't make a man powerful. Fear doesn't either." His voice stayed low and steady, the way a man speaks when he knows every word is true. "Courage does. Truth does. And you can't buy either one back once it's already in the open." Dr. Reed stepped up beside Elias. He opened his satchel and pulled out a thick stack of papers, each one marked and dated. His hands were steady. "These are the land deeds," Reed said. His voice was clear and firm. "Every farm you claimed you bought fair. Every family you pushed off their ground." He held up one page after another. "The signatures don't match. The dates were changed. A man named Harold Winters wrote every one of these in your name, and he swore to it in front of 3 witnesses before he left the valley for good." Crow's gray stallion shifted under him. He pulled the reins tight. "Paper can be faked," Crow said, but something in his voice had changed. The smoothness was gone. It came out thin. "Not this," Margaret said. She stepped closer, holding a small cloth pouch. She loosened the string and poured a bit of pale mineral dust into her palm. It caught the winter light and glowed faint blue. "This is from the spring. It preserves what touches it. Ink, paper, truth." She held up a folded letter, its edges dusted with that same soft shimmer. "This is the letter Samuel Pike wrote the night before he was killed. He named you. He said if anything happened to him, it was your doing." She unfolded it slowly. "Would you like me to read it out loud?" Crow said nothing. The crowd pressed in a little closer. The blacksmith uncrossed his arms. Old Ruth took a single step forward. The Hollis widow put her hand over her mouth. Then something happened that no one expected. One of Crow's own riders swung down from his saddle. He was a young man, maybe 20, with a thin beard and frightened eyes. He dropped his reins and walked away from the group, out into the open road, and stood with the townsfolk. "I'm done," he said quietly. "I won't hang for him." Another rider followed. Then another. One by one, the men who had ridden in behind Silas Crow stepped down and walked away from him. They left their leader sitting alone on his big gray horse in the middle of the road, surrounded by the very people he had spent years teaching to be afraid. Crow looked around. His empire was made of fear, and the fear was gone. The sheriff, a heavy-set man named Cole, who had looked the other way for years, finally stepped out of his office. His face was pale. He looked at the papers. He looked at the crowd. He looked at the men who had abandoned Crow. Then he looked at Elias. "Sheriff," Elias said, "you've got a job to do." For a long moment, no one breathed. Then Sheriff Cole walked forward. He reached up and took hold of Crow's arm. "Silas Crow," he said, and his voice shook only a little. "You're under arrest for the murder of Samuel Pike, and a good deal more." Crow did not fight. There was nothing left to fight with. He climbed down from his horse slow, his fine black coat suddenly looking like nothing more than cloth. As the sheriff led him toward the jailhouse, Crow turned his head and looked at Elias one last time. "You had nothing," he said, low and bitter. Elias met his eyes. "I had them," he said, and nodded toward the crowd. That was always enough. The door of the jailhouse closed, and for the first time in longer than anyone could remember, the people of Willow Creek stood together in the open street and were not afraid. The sun was low and gold by the time Elias rode back to the ranch. The snow had stopped. The valley lay quiet and white, and smoke curled soft from the chimney of the little house he had once thought of as a lonely place. He climbed down from his horse slow, his body tired in a way that felt good. The door flew open. "Elias!" Caleb came running. He crossed the yard fast, his boots kicking up snow, his cheeks bright pink and healthy, that little wooden horse still clutched in one hand. There was no ice in him now, no cold, just a boy running full speed toward home. Elias dropped to one knee and caught him. He held on tight. Winter softened into something gentler as the weeks passed. The snow still lay across the valley, but it no longer felt cruel. It sparkled now. It caught the sun and threw it back like 1,000 tiny lamps, and the folks of Willow Creek walked through it with their heads up instead of down. The land came back to the families who had lost it. One by one, the deeds were sorted out. Sheriff Cole worked long hours with Dr. Reed and Margaret, matching names to farms, returning what had been stolen. The Hollis widow got her wheat fields back. The blacksmith got the acre behind his shop where his father was buried. Old Ruth wept when she stood again on the porch of the house she had been pushed out of years before, and the spring was safe. The town made a promise. No one man would ever own it. The healing water beneath Elias's ranch belonged to everyone now, protected by every family who lived in the valley. Dr. Reed studied it careful, learning what it could do, keeping records so the knowledge would never be lost again. But the biggest change happened at the ranch itself. It started small. A family came through, cold and hungry, running from hard times in the next county over. Elias took them in without a second thought. He gave them a warm bed and a hot meal and work to do until they got back on their feet. Then another family came, and another. Word spread the way good news does. There was a ranch at the edge of Willow Creek where a widowed cowboy never turned anyone away, where a boy with bright pink cheeks met you at the gate, where a woman named Margaret made sure you had a full plate before you slept. The place that had once felt like a graveyard now rang with voices. Children chased each other through the barn. Men mended fences side by side and laughed while they did it. Women hung wash on the line and traded stories. Smoke rose from the chimney every morning, and the smell of fresh bread drifted across the yard. Elias stood on the porch one evening and just watched it all. Caleb ran past, chasing a pup that had wandered in and decided to stay. Margaret called from the kitchen door that supper was near ready. Somewhere out by the barn, a fiddle started up, thin and sweet in the cold air. Elias felt something in his chest he had almost forgotten. He felt full. The next morning, before the house woke, Elias walked out alone to the low hill behind the barn. Clara's memorial stood there, a simple stone, smoothed by his own hands, with her name carved deep. He had come here 1,000 times over the years. He had come to talk. He had come to weep. He had come most often to punish himself. But this morning felt different. He knelt in the snow. The cold soaked through his knee, but he did not mind it. He looked at her name a long while before he spoke. "I found a family, Clara," he said. His voice was low and rough. "I didn't go looking for one. It found me. It came up out of the snow." He let out a breath. It hung in the air, then faded. "For a long time I thought I was a man who saved cattle and lost people," he went on. "I carried that boy in the storm the same way I carried the guilt. I told myself I was saving him." He stopped. His throat tightened. "But he saved me, Clara. That's the truth of it. That little boy reached up out of the cold and pulled me back into the warm." Tears slid down his face. but he was not ashamed of them. "You always told me one failure doesn't make a man," he whispered. "You said saving one life is never too late." He pressed his hand flat against the stone. "I finally believe you." He stayed there a moment longer, and something heavy lifted off his shoulders. Something he had carried so long he'd forgotten it wasn't part of him. The guilt let go. For the first time in years, Elias Boone forgave himself. He reached into his coat and drew out a small wooden horse, carved careful over long winter nights. He set it gently at the base of the stone. Then he stood, wiped his face, and turned back toward home, where a boy and a family and a whole, warm life were waiting for him. Winter came round again, but this time the whole valley waited for it like an old friend. The first snow fell soft and slow the week before the festival. By the time the day arrived, Willow Creek lay under a clean white blanket that sparkled from every rooftop and fence post. The air smelled of wood smoke and cinnamon and roasting meat. They held it in the wide field near Elias's ranch, where the land rolled gentle and the barn stood tall behind them like a watchful friend. Fires burned in a great ring across the field. Not the desperate fires of a storm, but happy ones, crackling bright, throwing warmth and light into the cold. Families gathered close around them. Old folks sat wrapped in quilts on hay bales, their faces glowing orange. Children darted between the flames, cheeks red, breath puffing white, laughing so hard they had to stop and catch their air. Long tables groaned under the weight of food. The baker had brought loaves still warm from the oven. The Hollis widow set out pies from her own returned wheat. Someone had strung ribbons between the trees, and they fluttered bright against the snow. The fiddle player from the barn stood by the biggest fire, and his tune was quick and glad. Boots stomped. Hands clapped. A few brave couples danced in the packed snow, while the whole town cheered them on. Elias stood at the edge of it all, a warm cup in his hands, and he watched. He had spent so many winters alone, so many nights listening to the wind and feeling like the cold had crawled inside him to stay. He never thought a winter could feel like this, full of noise, full of light, full of people who once passed his gate without a word and now called out his name like he was one of their own. Because he was. "Elias!" a small voice shouted. "Elias, watch me!" He turned. Caleb sat atop a small brown pony, back straight, chin high, both hands gripping the reins the way Elias had taught him. The boy who had come to him, frozen and silent, barely a whisper of life left in his body, now sat tall in the saddle, with his cheeks bright pink and his eyes shining. Dr. Reed walked alongside, one hand near the pony's bridle, just in case. But Caleb did not need much help. He guided the pony in a slow, proud circle around the nearest fire, and the whole crowd hushed and then broke into a cheer. "Look at him go!" someone hollered. "That's the frozen boy," cried another. "Look at him now!" Caleb beamed. He found Elias in the crowd and waved, nearly losing his balance, then grabbing the reins again and laughing at himself. Elias laughed too. It came up out of him easy, the way it used to, before the grief. Margaret came to stand beside him. She had a shawl pulled tight around her shoulders and flour still dusting her sleeves. She watched her son ride, and her eyes glistened in the firelight. "You ever think we'd see this?" she asked softly. "No," Elias admitted. "There were nights I didn't think we'd see morning." She reached over and squeezed his arm. "But you didn't give up. Neither did you." They stood together a while, watching Caleb ride, watching the town they had helped mend laugh and dance and live again. Later, when the fires had burned low and the fiddle had gone quiet, when Margaret had carried a sleepy Caleb inside and the last families had wandered home through the snow, Elias walked once more to the low hill behind the barn. He carried something in his hand, the wooden horse, the one Caleb had held when Elias first dug him out of the snow, the one that had belonged to the boy's own father. Caleb had pressed it into Elias's hands that evening, cheeks flushed from riding, and said, "He doesn't need this one anymore. He's got a real horse now, and he's got you." Elias knelt at Clara's stone. The snow had gathered soft around the little horse he'd left there months before. He set the second one gently beside it. "He rode today, Clara," he whispered. "You should have seen him. Sat up proud as anything." He looked at the two small horses, side by side in the snow. "They said it was the spring that saved him," Elias murmured. "Doc Reed says it was the minerals and the fires and the broth. Maybe it was." He shook his head slow. "But I don't think that's the whole truth of it." He pressed his hand flat against the cold stone. "That boy wasn't saved by medicine or by fire," he said. "He was saved because somebody refused to give up on him, because somebody stayed." Behind him, down the hill, the ranch glowed warm against the dark. Lamplight in the windows, smoke curling from the chimney. A whole valley below it, healed and hopeful, sleeping easy for the first time in years. Elias stood. He wiped his eyes, though he was smiling now. Then he turned and walked home, into the warmth where his family waited. I hope you like this story. Please share what's your favorite part of the story and where in the world you are watching from. Have a wonderful day.